The night watchman would later say it was the most terrifying scream he'd ever heard in his 30 years on the job. It wasn't just the sound that chilled him, it was the way it seemed to echo through the quiet streets at dawn, carrying something more than fear, something that spoke of a horror beyond imagination. That scream marked the beginning of a story so dark many still refused to speak of it. Emma Carter's hands shook as she stood in her father's doorway, her 18-year-old frame frozen in the kind of terror that changes a person forever. Thomas Carter, the town's beloved butcher, lay motionless in his bed, his body bearing wounds that defied explanation. Just yesterday he had been alive, laughing, helping struggling families with free cuts of meat, teaching Emma how to manage the shop's books. Now he was gone, taken in a way that would haunt the town for years to come. "It's impossible," Dr. Wilson whispered, examining the deep gashes that covered Thomas's chest. "These marks, they're like nothing I've ever seen." He turned to the police officer beside him, shaking his head in disbelief. The door was locked from the inside, every window sealed. Whatever did this? The whispers started immediately. Some said it was an animal attack, but how could an animal get into a locked room? Others suggested darker theories, but none could explain the strange marks on Thomas's body or the look of pure terror frozen on his face. For Emma, standing alone in the hallway of her childhood home, none of these whispers mattered. She was now truly alone in the world. Her mother had passed away from illness years ago, and now her father, her protector, her teacher, her entire world, was gone too. But what she didn't know then, what none of them knew, was that this was only the beginning. The true horror was still to come, wrapped in the false comfort of family and hidden behind the mask of those who claimed to care. As Emma sat in the empty shop that evening, surrounded by the tools of her father's trade, memories washed over her like waves. The worn leather of his apron still hung on its hook, and she could almost hear his cheerful voice calling out to customers. "You see, Emma," he had told her just last week, his eyes twinkling as he showed her how to check the books, "our shop isn't just about making money. It's about taking care of people." She remembered how he would slip extra cuts of meat into packages for families he knew were struggling, always with a conspiratorial wink in her direction. The memory of their last day together now felt like a knife in her heart. Thomas had been unusually quiet that morning, studying old photographs she'd never seen before. "Your Uncle Robert wasn't always like he is now," he had said, showing her a yellowed picture of two young boys smiling at the camera. "We were so close once, before money changed him." Emma hadn't asked more then. Her father rarely spoke about his younger brother. She knew only bits and pieces, how Robert had demanded half the shop when their father died, how he'd threatened legal action, how he disappeared 5 years ago after Thomas refused to sell. Now she wished she'd asked more questions. The sound of the shop's bell jerked her back to reality. Mrs. Thompson, one of their regular customers, stood there with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Emma," she said, pulling the girl into a tight embrace, "your father saved my family during the worst winter of our lives. Never asked for a penny back." She pressed an envelope into Emma's hands. We all remembered. As word of Thomas's death spread, more people came forward with stories. The old man whose grocery bill Thomas had paid in secret. The young mother whose children he'd fed when her husband left. The struggling student he'd given a part-time job. Each story revealed another thread in the tapestry of kindness her father had woven through their community. But amid the flood of mourners, Emma noticed something strange. People who came to pay respects would start to say something about the night before her father's death, about sounds they'd heard, about shadows they'd seen moving in the dark, only to fall silent when others came near. It was as if a shadow of fear hung over their words, something they dared not speak aloud. 200 miles away, in a rundown traveling show on the outskirts of another town, Robert Carter stood before a massive cage, his face illuminated by flickering lantern light. The bear inside wasn't always the monster it had become. Once it had been a playful cub found abandoned in the woods. But Robert had seen something else in those innocent eyes, a tool he could shape, a weapon he could control. Time for another lesson, he would whisper during those long nights of training. The methods he used were cruel. Starvation, pain, and fear became his tools. He would hold food just out of reach until the bear learned to attack on command. Month after month, he broke the animal's spirit, turning its natural strength into a controlled fury that he could direct at will. Linda, his wife, watched these sessions with growing fascination. "Perfect," she would say, seeing the bear respond to Robert's subtle signals. "Thomas won't know what hit him." Their son James learned to mimic his father's cruelty, practicing the commands when Robert wasn't around. The bear's transformation wasn't the only darkness in Robert's life. Local papers told stories of mysterious accidents at his shows, competitors who suddenly went out of business, animals that attacked their owners, properties that changed hands under suspicious circumstances. But no one could ever prove anything. Robert was too clever, too careful. He kept a journal hidden under loose floorboards in his trailer. Its pages revealed an obsession that had consumed him for years: his brother's success. Every entry burned with jealousy over the butcher shop that should have been rightfully half his. He tracked Thomas's growing prosperity from afar, his hatred festering like a wound that wouldn't heal. "The fool thinks kindness builds a legacy," he wrote. "I'll show him what real power looks like." The final pages detailed his plan: how to train the bear to kill without leaving evidence, how to make it look like an accident, how to position himself as the grieving brother who would take care of his niece. What Robert didn't record was how the bear watched him during those planning sessions, its eyes holding something beyond the blank stare of a broken animal, something that looked almost like patience, like waiting. The morning of the funeral brought a performance worthy of the theater. Robert arrived with Linda and James, his face a perfect mask of grief. Neighbors who had gathered to support Emma watched as he threw himself over his brother's coffin, crying out with such convincing anguish that several people had to turn away. "My dreams warned me," he sobbed, gripping the coffin's edges. "Night after night I saw you calling for me, brother. Why didn't I come sooner?" Linda stood beside him, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, while James kept his gaze fixed on Emma with an intensity that made several mourners uncomfortable. Emma felt numb as she watched her uncle's display. Something about his tears seemed rehearsed, like an actor who had practiced his lines too many times. But when he wrapped his arms around her, declaring to everyone that he would take care of his beloved niece, who could object? After all, he was her only living relative. The changes began the very next day. First, it was small things: Linda rearranging furniture that had stood in the same places since Emma's mother was alive. Then Robert began reviewing the shop's paperwork, spending hours in Thomas's office. But it was the arrival of the covered cage that marked the real turning point. A protection measure, Robert explained to the concerned neighbors as his crew unloaded the massive container. "These streets aren't as safe as they used to be." The bear inside remained silent, but Emma saw its eyes following her through the bars, reflecting something that looked almost like a warning. Within a week, Robert had taken over the shop's operations completely. "You're too young to handle such responsibility," he told Emma, his voice dripping with fake concern. "Let your uncle take care of everything." The same customers who had shared stories of her father's kindness now found themselves dealing with Robert's cold efficiency and rising prices. Linda's true nature emerged like a snake shedding its skin. Gone was the sympathetic aunt who had held Emma at the funeral. In her place stood a harsh taskmaster who criticized everything from Emma's cooking to her appearance. "If you want to stay in this house," she would say, "you need to earn your keep." But it was James who truly terrified Emma. She would catch him standing outside her door late at night or find him going through her personal belongings when he thought she wasn't around. "Just getting to know my dear cousin better," he would say with a smile that never reached his eyes. Life in what had once been Emma's happy home became a waking nightmare. Each morning brought new demands and fresh humiliations. Linda would wake her before dawn with a list of chores that seemed to grow longer every day. "Your father spoiled you," she would sneer. "It's time you learned how the real world works." The bear's presence became a constant source of terror. Emma noticed how it grew agitated whenever she passed near its cage, straining against its chains and making those horrible sounds that triggered fragments of memory from the night her father died. Sometimes she would wake up at night, certain she had heard those same sounds outside her window. James took particular pleasure in using the bear to frighten her. He would wait until she was alone in the backyard, then rattle the cage. "Oops," he would laugh as she jumped in fear. "Looks like Max doesn't like you much. Better be careful, accidents happen all the time." The shop that had once been filled with warmth and laughter became cold and hostile. Regular customers stopped coming, driven away by Robert's harsh policies and inflated prices. "Business is business," he would say, counting money at the end of each day. "Your father never understood that." Emma tried reaching out to neighbors, but Robert had thought of everything. "Poor girl," he would tell anyone who asked. "Still traumatized by her father's death. She's been imagining all sorts of things." He made sure to say it with just the right mix of concern and sadness, playing the part of the caring uncle perfectly. The paperwork started appearing, documents about ownership transfers, property rights, power of attorney. "Just formalities," Robert insisted, pushing them across the table. "Sign here, dear niece, unless you want to end up on the streets." Each time Emma refused, she noticed how his friendly mask would slip just a little more. But it was the whispered conversations that truly chilled her blood. Late at night, she would hear them talking in the study, discussions about what to do with her, mentions of her father's death that made no sense. Words like training and sent and command floated through the walls, pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. Then came the night when everything changed, when a single overheard conversation revealed the horrifying truth behind her father's death and showed Emma exactly what kind of monsters had invaded her home. The old grandfather clock in the hallway had just struck midnight when Emma crept downstairs for water. Her head throbbed from another day of Linda's endless demands and James's constant harassment. But as she passed the study, Robert's voice stopped her cold. "The girl's becoming a problem," he was saying. "Just like her father, too stubborn to know what's good for her." Emma pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. Linda's cruel laugh joined her husband's voice. "We could always use Max again," Linda suggested. "It worked perfectly with Thomas. No one ever suspects a trained bear, especially when the doors are locked from the inside." Emma had to press her hand against her mouth to stop from gasping as Robert continued. "Remember how proud I was of Max that night?" His voice carried a sickening satisfaction. "All it took was Thomas's old shirt to give him the scent. One command and our perfect weapon did exactly what he was trained to do, clean, efficient, and completely untraceable." James's voice joined in, eager and cold. "I've been practicing the commands with Max. He responds even better now, and I've already got something with Emma's scent on it." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. The mysterious wounds on her father's body, the bear's strange behavior around her, her uncle's convenient arrival, the cruel training sessions she'd glimpsed. They had murdered her father using the bear as their weapon, and now they planned to do the same to her. Emma's mind raced with fragments of memory, the strange sounds she'd heard the night of her father's death, sounds she now recognized as command words, the way the bear had seemed to recognize her father's scent on her in those first days, the knowing looks Robert and Linda had exchanged whenever someone mentioned Thomas's mysterious death. She started to back away, her whole body trembling, but in her dazed state, she knocked against the hall table. The vase wobbled, then crashed to the floor with a sound that seemed to shake the whole house. "What was that?" Robert's sharp voice cut through the silence inside the study. Chairs scraped against the floor as footsteps moved toward the door. Emma turned to run but found James already standing at the end of the hallway, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Going somewhere, cousin?" he asked, moving to block her escape. Behind her, the study door opened, spilling lamplight into the dark hallway. Emma ran for her bedroom, her heart thundering in her chest. Behind her, she could hear Robert's voice, no longer pretending to be kind. "Get her. Don't let her escape." The sound of multiple footsteps pounded up the stairs as she slammed her door shut, frantically pushing her dresser against it. "Open this door, sweet niece," Robert's voice dripped with menace. "We need to talk about what you heard, about what happens to nosy little girls who don't mind their own business." The door shuddered as they began to push against it. Through her panic, Emma could hear Linda's excited whispers. "Do it now, Robert. Give Max the command before someone hears us." The dresser scraped against the floor as the door began to give way, but then another sound cut through the chaos, the sharp crack of breaking chain followed by the thunderous roar of the bear. Linda's scream pierced the night. "Robert, the beast is loose?" What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The dresser finally gave way and James burst through the door, reaching for Emma with twisted glee on his face. But before his fingers could touch her, a massive dark shape filled the doorway behind him. The bear stood there, its eyes no longer blank and submissive but blazing with what looked like years of pent-up rage. In that moment, Emma saw something she'd missed before, how the beast had always watched Robert with hidden hatred, how it had waited for this precise moment. James turned just in time to see the massive paw swinging toward him. His scream was cut short as the bear struck, sending him crashing into the wall. Linda's hysterical shrieks filled the house as she watched her son fall, while Robert scrambled backward, frantically shouting commands that the bear no longer obeyed. "Stop, Max. Stop. I command you to stop." Robert's voice cracked with fear as the bear advanced on him, but years of cruelty had finally backfired. The weapon he had created had turned against its master. The bear moved with terrible purpose, backing Robert and Linda into a corner. Yet strangely, when Emma moved, it shifted to stay between her and her tormentors, like a protective shield. The same creature that had been forced to kill her father was now defending his daughter. The police were called, and as they led Robert and Linda away in handcuffs, the truth about their traveling show emerged: mysterious deaths, suspicious accidents, businesses that had changed hands under strange circumstances, all traced back to Robert and his trained bear. The weapon he had created to destroy others had ultimately destroyed him instead. James survived his injuries but would spend years in prison for his role in the plot. The sight of him being wheeled to the police car, broken and defeated, made several neighbors turn away in disgust. The bear, surprisingly calm now that its tormentors were gone, allowed animal control experts to approach. They discovered countless scars beneath its fur, evidence of the cruel training it had endured. But they also found something else, an intelligence and gentleness that emerged once it was freed from Robert's influence. When they came to take the bear to a wildlife sanctuary, Emma stood watching with mixed emotions. This creature had been forced to kill her father, yet in the end, it had saved her life. As if sensing her thoughts, the bear turned to look at her one last time. In its eyes she saw something that looked like understanding, perhaps even regret. Months passed and life slowly returned to normal. Emma reopened the butcher shop, running it the way her father had, with kindness and generosity. The regular customers came back and the warmth returned to the place that had grown so cold. Sometimes when the shop was quiet, Emma thought about everything that had happened. She thought about her father's legacy of kindness, about how evil ultimately destroys itself, and about redemption coming from unexpected places. The bear that had been trained to kill had chosen instead to protect, proving that even the darkest weapon can choose light over darkness. The town never forgot what happened. They tell the story now as a warning about greed and cruelty, but also as a reminder that justice finds its way, sometimes through the most unlikely means. And in the small garden behind the shop, Emma planted a tree in memory of her father, and beside it, a small plaque honoring an unlikely guardian, proof that even those forced into darkness can find their way back to the light.